The dog refused to touch the steak. That was the first thing everyone noticed. Rusty usually inhaled anything that landed in his bowl. This time, he sniffed it, looked toward me, then quietly walked over and rested his head against my leg instead. The room burst into awkward laughter. Even the dog thinks it's overcooked. Someone joked. Nobody knew why I couldn't laugh, because that steak had been sitting on my plate less than 10 seconds earlier. My name is George Whitmore. I'm 70 years old. I've spent most of my life believing respect isn't something you demand. It's something people give back after you've spent years giving it first. Apparently, I was wrong. It had started 30 minutes earlier. The house buzzed with music. Children ran through the hallway. Neighbors crowded the backyard. My son, Ryan, loved hosting summer cookouts, at least that's what he called them. The truth was, I bought the groceries. I paid for the charcoal. I covered the drinks. And somehow, the barbecue always ended up at my house. I never complained. Seeing everyone together felt worth it, or at least, it used to. That afternoon, I stood beside the grill flipping steaks while smoke drifted into the warm July air. Ryan carried coolers. His wife, Courtney, arranged food on the patio table. Friends kept wandering over. George, those smell incredible. You've still got the magic touch. I smiled. Cooking had always been my language. When my late wife was alive, she baked. I grilled. Together we never let anyone leave hungry. After she was gone, I kept cooking. Maybe because feeding people felt like keeping part of her alive. Once every steak was finished, Courtney carried the platter toward the table. She counted quietly. 1, 2, 3, she frowned. There aren't enough. Ryan shrugged. So? She looked around, then her eyes landed on me. Without lowering her voice, she said, "Take his." Ryan didn't even hesitate. Good idea. Courtney picked up the steak from my plate, the one I'd just sat down to eat. She walked straight past every guest, bent down, dropped it into Rusty's stainless steel bowl. The dog looked confused. I looked even more confused. Courtney dusted off her hands. There. Problem solved. The patio went silent. I managed a small smile. "I think there are burgers left," she laughed. "Oh, George, you don't need another steak. You eat too much anyway." Ryan leaned back in his chair and grinned. "She's trying to keep you healthy." A few guests forced polite smiles. Others stared at their plates. Nobody spoke, nobody objected, nobody handed me theirs. Rusty still hadn't touched the steak. Instead, he sat beside my chair, looking up at me, waiting. Animals don't understand humiliation, but somehow, that old dog knew the food belonged to me. I scratched behind his ears. "It's all right, buddy. You can have it." He still wouldn't eat. I stood, not angrily, not dramatically. I folded my napkin, placed it beside the empty plate, then walked inside the house. No one followed. From the kitchen window, I could hear the party continue. Music, laughter, the sound of forks scraping plates. Life moved on surprisingly fast when the only person missing was the one everyone had started taking for granted. I opened the pantry, reached behind a stack of flour containers, and pulled out a small spiral notebook. It wasn't a diary. It wasn't a recipe book. For the past 11 years, I'd written down every single dollar I'd quietly spent on these family cookouts, every receipt, every grocery run, every birthday, every holiday, every barbecue. I turned to the last completed page, then wrote one final sentence. Today's cookout was the last one I will ever pay for. I closed the notebook. Outside, they were still laughing. None of them realized they had just celebrated the end of a tradition that had been holding their family together for over a decade. And they were about to learn how expensive laughter becomes when the person funding it finally walks away. Monday morning felt strangely peaceful. No shopping list, no trip to the butcher, no calls asking how many people were coming. For the first time in years, I drank my coffee while it was still hot. I didn't realize how exhausting generosity had become until I stopped practicing it. Around noon, my phone buzzed. "Ryan. Dad, what time are you starting the grill Friday?" I smiled to myself, not because it was funny, because he honestly believed nothing had changed. "I'm not." Silence. "What do you mean?" "I'm not hosting this week." Another pause. "So, you're taking a break?" "No, I'm finished." He laughed. "Finished with what?" "Paying for everyone else's weekends." The line went quiet, then he chuckled. "Come on, don't still be upset about the steak. It was one meal." "No, it was 11 years. Before he could answer, I ended the call. Thursday afternoon, my next-door neighbor, Mrs. Delaney, stopped by carrying a basket of peaches. I heard Ryan's having everyone over tomorrow. I smiled. He is, at your place again? No. She looked confused. I thought he always used your backyard. He does. Not this time. She tilted her head. Where's he having it? I honestly don't know. Neither did he. Friday arrived. At 4 o'clock, 3 cars pulled into my driveway, then another, then another. Guests climbed out carrying folding chairs and coolers, exactly like they had every summer. They froze when they realized nothing had been set up. No tables, no grill smoking, no music, no smell of food. Ryan hurried across the lawn. Dad, what happened? I looked up from the book I was reading on the porch. What do you mean? The barbecue. What barbecue? The one we always have. I wasn't aware anyone invited me. His smile disappeared. Seriously? You know everybody's here. I can see that. Courtney climbed out of the SUV carrying 2 empty serving trays. She looked around. Where's the food? There isn't any. Her face tightened. What do you mean there isn't any? I mean exactly that. I didn't buy any. She laughed nervously. George, stop joking. I'm hungry, so am I. But unlike last week, I plan on eating. The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. One of Ryan's friends whispered, I thought you said your dad handled everything. Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. He usually does. Usually, that word lingered in the air. Usually, as if it had always been my responsibility. Courtney crossed her arms. So what are we supposed to do now? I shrugged. I imagine the same thing every other family does. Buy groceries, cook, host. Her expression hardened. You knew people were coming. No, I knew people expected me to rescue their plans. There's a difference. Ryan stepped closer. His voice lowered. You're embarrassing us. I looked around the yard at 15 adults standing beside empty picnic tables, then back at my son. No, Ryan, you embarrassed yourself. You invited people to a barbecue without buying a single hamburger. A few guests quietly picked up their chairs. One couple apologized to me before leaving. Another family simply got back into their car. Within 15 minutes, the yard was almost empty. Courtney slammed her serving trays into the trunk. This is unbelievable. You ruined everything. I stood slowly. No, I stopped allowing you to ruin me. As they drove away, Mrs. Delaney walked over from next door. She handed me one of the peaches from her basket. You know, I've lived beside you for 18 years. I always wondered why every cookout looked like so much work. She smiled. I guess I finally know. I laughed. So do I. The following Tuesday, I walked into Miller's grocery to buy a loaf of bread. The cashier looked surprised. No steaks today? No, big family cookout cancelled? I smiled. Retired. She laughed. From grilling? I shook my head. No, from being taken for granted. She nodded as if she understood completely. What I didn't know was someone else had overheard that conversation. Someone who had been quietly watching my family for months. And before the week was over, that stranger would hand me an opportunity Ryan never imagined existed. The stranger introduced himself before I had a chance to ask why he'd been staring at me. My name's Victor Ellis. He extended his hand. I own Ellis Smokehouse. I'd heard of it. Everyone in the county had. His family restaurants had become something of a local institution. I've seen you in Miller's grocery, he said. And at the farmer's market. I've also eaten your food. I frowned. My food? He smiled. Your son invited me to one of your cookouts last summer. I don't think we were introduced. I remembered him then. Tall, grey-beard Kiet, the man who'd complimented my ribs before leaving early. Victor looked me straight in the eye. I've spent 40 years in the restaurant business. I know good barbecue, but that's not why I'm here. He paused. I watched something happen at your last cookout. I already knew what he meant. The steak, he nodded. I also watched every guest wait for you to light the grill. They weren't there because of your son. They were there because of you. He slid a business card across the cafe table. I've got 6 restaurants. My pitmaster is retiring. I don't need someone to stand over a grill all day. I need someone who understands why people gather around food. I laughed softly. I'm 70. So am I. Victor smiled. My best ideas came after 65. He leaned back. I'm offering you 3 days a week. You choose the menu, you teach my younger cooks, and every Saturday, I want you to host a community barbecue. I blinked. Community? He nodded. Veterans, retirees, single parents, college kids, anyone who doesn't have somewhere to eat. For the first time since Margaret died, cooking sounded joyful again, not exhausting. 3 weeks later, the first Saturday barbecue opened. We expected maybe 20 people. Nearly 80 showed up. Families shared tables with strangers. Children played tag in the courtyard. An elderly widow celebrated her birthday. A young couple announced they were expecting their first baby. No one cared who had money. No one counted portions. No one worried about getting the biggest steak. Everyone simply ate, laughed, talked, exactly the way Margaret always believed families should. Victor walked over carrying 2 plates. "You look happier." "I am." "You know why?" I smiled. "Because nobody here expects me to serve them. They appreciate it." He nodded. "There's a difference." That evening, I was wiping down the grill when I heard a familiar voice. "Dad." Ryan. He stood near the entrance looking uncomfortable. Courtney stayed several steps behind him. Neither looked like they belonged there. Ryan glanced around. "I didn't know. All this was yours." "It isn't. It belongs to the community." He nodded slowly. "I've been hearing people talk. They love this place." I smiled. "They love eating together." He looked at the long line of people waiting for barbecue, then quietly asked, "How much are they paying you?" I laughed. "That's your first question?" He looked embarrassed. I was curious. I make more in 3 days here than I ever spent feeding everyone at our cookouts." His face changed, not jealousy, calculation. He was adding up years in his head, realizing how much my generosity had actually been worth. Courtney finally stepped forward. "We've been thinking." My stomach tightened. "Not again." She forced a smile. "Maybe we could restart family cookouts. You know, like before." I looked at both of them, then behind me, at 80 strangers laughing together, helping each other carry trays, sharing desserts with people they'd met only an hour earlier. "I already have." They frowned. "What?" I restarted them. "I just invited people who know how to say thank you." Neither of them answered for the first time. Silence belonged to them instead of me. As they turned to leave, Victor walked beside me and quietly asked, "Do you think they'll ever understand?" I watched Ryan help an elderly customer hold the restaurant door open before walking outside, then I smiled. "They're about to." Because 2 days earlier, someone had mailed me an old photograph from one of our very first family barbecues. And what Ryan saw on the back of that picture would finally explain why losing my respect had cost him far more than a free meal. The photograph arrived in an ordinary white envelope. No return address, no note, just a single picture. It had been taken almost 12 years earlier, our very first summer barbecue after Ryan and Courtney bought their house. Margaret stood beside me, wearing her favorite yellow dress. Ryan was flipping burgers. Courtney was laughing with a lemonade in her hand. Everyone looked happy. I turned the photograph over. Margaret's handwriting covered the back. She had always written little notes on photographs. Usually dates, sometimes recipes. This one simply read, "If our family ever forgets that the person cooking deserves to eat first, remind them this wasn't how we raised our son." I stood in my kitchen for a long time, reading that sentence over and over. It wasn't revenge. It was a reminder. Margaret had somehow left me the words I needed years before I ever needed them. The following Saturday, Victor asked if I'd be willing to host a special community dinner. Instead of charging anyone, every guest would bring one homemade side dish. No expensive decorations, no speeches, just food, conversation, and gratitude. Nearly 100 people came. Some brought cornbread, some brought pies. One teenage boy proudly carried the first macaroni and cheese he'd ever cooked. An elderly woman arrived with homemade peach cobbler. She apologized because it wasn't perfect. Everyone applauded anyway. That was the kind of family I'd been looking for all along. One built on appreciation, not expectation. Just before sunset, Ryan and Courtney walked into the courtyard. This time, they weren't dressed like guests. Ryan carried 2 large coolers. Courtney held several covered trays. Victor looked at me. "You expecting them?" "No." Ryan stopped in front of everyone. His hands shook slightly. "I'd like to say something." The courtyard became quiet. He swallowed hard. "My father spent years feeding people. I always thought he liked doing it. I never stopped to ask what it was costing him." He looked directly at me. I laughed when he was humiliated. I let my wife treat him like he didn't matter. I failed him. Courtney stepped beside him, Tears rolled down her cheeks before she even spoke. I thought because you never complained, you never got hurt. I confused kindness with permission. I'm ashamed of that. Then, to everyone's surprise, she walked toward the serving table, picked up a clean plate, walked back to the grill, waited until I finished slicing a brisket, placed the plate in front of me, and quietly said, "George, you first." The entire courtyard remained silent, no applause, no dramatic music, just one simple gesture, the gesture that should have happened weeks earlier. I looked at the plate, then at Ryan. "When your mother was alive, she always made sure I ate first." He nodded through tears. "I remember, I just forgot." I picked up my fork, took one bite, then smiled. It's still a little overcooked. Laughter spread across the courtyard. Real laughter, the kind that heals instead of hurts. Later that evening, Ryan helped wash every grill. Courtney stayed until every table was folded, not because anyone asked them to, because they wanted to. As we loaded the last cooler into my truck, Ryan handed me the old photograph. "I'd like you to keep it." I shook my head. "No, it's yours now. So every time you host a meal, you'll remember what your mother wrote." He carefully folded the picture and slipped it into his wallet. I'll never forget again. A year later, the Saturday community barbecue had become the town's favorite tradition. Ryan volunteered almost every weekend. Courtney organized donations for families who couldn't afford groceries. And before every meal, no matter who was cooking, Ryan always carried one plate across the courtyard. He'd place it in front of me with a smile and say, "Chef eats first." Not because I needed the food, but because he'd finally learned. Respect isn't measured by the size of the meal you serve someone. It's measured by whether you remember they deserve a place at the table.